I just wanted to get rid of that.
But then when I put it on later afterwards, I realized it was like marijuana leaves. I was wearing it all
I
night
saw
at
this when
temple.
I bought the guitar. Because it was the only acoustic I had that had a strap on it.
Yeah,
Now let me just get a regular strap. So that's
yeah.
comfortable.
When I got the yeah, anyway, that's
I keep la 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 Shabbat Shalom. Hi, Shabbat Shalom. Welcome. Welcome, Zoomiverse friends. Shabbat Shalom to you and to those from YouTubeverse. We're glad that everybody is here tonight. Just a quick couple of important things to keep in mind. First of all, we are a community, and it is all our responsibility to make sure that everyone here feels that they are seen and welcome, and so we have to make an effort to introduce ourselves to people we don't know, to say hello, to extend ourselves. Now, after the service, while you're schmoozing, whenever, you might see someone having a little trouble in the prayer book because they're here for the first time, etc. Feel free to lean over and help them out. Be friendly. Restrooms are located down the hall to our left, but we also have all gender single restrooms in the office and downstairs. And finally, Shabbat Shalom to all. If we are in some way not using the microphone well, or you need us to say something again, just raise your hand and let us know. Yeah. They're hearing things? Oh yes, and there is hearing impaired devices and larger print prayer books as well. I thought you were telling me someone was hearing things. And I was going to say, I'm glad you're here for Shabbat. Hello, Rabbi.
Hello. How you
Sliding
doing?
in. As we continue on page 24 with Ed and Bob and all of you. Of course, and our special guest will introduce him in a moment. But first, here we go. We join together to welcome the ministering angels. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Amiralech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Boachem, Boachem L'Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Amiralech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Baruch Hu, Shalom, Malachei Shalom, Shalom, Malachei Shalom, Malachei Elyon, Milech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shalom Aleichem, Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Milech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.
So there are some weeks I feel like that we need Shabbat more than others. Sometimes because of the events of the outside world, and sometimes because of the events personally. This week, for the first time really in a year, my son had an exposure, and he's at this point out of the 5-day window and tested today. But he was home with me this week, which meant that between my work duties, I was arguing with him about whether or not we were going to watch Elsa or Moana on television. Now, what does that mean? Why is that important? Why are we doing this? Well, the answer is that Shabbat is meant to become a respite for this. And although what's interesting is that if the thing that's stressing you out is family time, and Shabbat is a time for family, and you have little children, Shabbat may not be actually the respite that you think it's going to be. And that's true. That's true for all of us. It's not like our worries disappear when Shabbat rolls around. I'm sure tonight or tomorrow morning we're going to have that same fight about Moana. But what the thing about it is that Shabbat provides an opportunity to reframe the day. It provides an opportunity, even with the same stresses, even with the same problems that will not go away, it allows you a chance to try to look at them with different and new eyes. And your goal as you pray tonight is to cultivate that different eyesight, to make it so that you can, with those fresh, with those new eyes, see those problems in a different way. Not as problems, but sometimes as opportunities. And even when those problems are so big that you can't reframe it in that way. Understand that everything in your life is multifaceted. And if Shabbat can give you space, it can give you space to turn and look at that in a different angle, so that even if your problems remain your problems, you see them anew and afresh. And so we're going to move now into lighting our Shabbat candles and into ushering formally in this 25 hours of renewed perspective. And to do that, we've got 2 simchas happening this weekend. And so in the morning, Nate is going to become bar mitzvah, and then in the afternoon, Gabe will become bar mitzvah. And so in honor of their 2 back-to-back simchas, I'm going to invite them with their families up to light our candles and to lead us in Kiddush, which you can find on page 2 and 3, and then turning to 5 afterwards. So come on up.
Page 2.
As these Shabbat
Hold on, you're muted. Wait, no. No, that time it wasn't your.
Check, check.
As these Shabbat candles give light to all who behold them, so may we, by our lives, give light to all who behold us. As their brightness reminds us of the generations of Israel who have kindled light, so may we, in our own day, be among those who kindle light.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kirishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat.
O source of light and truth, creator of the eternal law of goodness, help us find knowledge by which to live. Lead us to take the words we shall speak into our hearts and our lives.
Bless all who enter the sanctuary in need, all who bring the offerings of their hearts. May our worship lead to acts of kindness, peace, and love.
We're going to move forward now. Page number 5 for Kiddush.
Gafen.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kadishanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho v'ahava uvratzon kinchilanu zikaron l'maaseh b'reishiv kihu yom techila l'mikra'ei kodesh zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim
Kivanu v'acharta ve'otanu kidashta mikol ha'amim v'shabbat kodeshecha ve'ahava uratzon hinchaltanu
Baruch atah Adonai Mikadesh HaShabbat.
Amen. Eloheim. It's hard to do that coordinated. Well done.
All right. Mazel tov.
Well done. We continue together, page 20. We welcome in the Sabbath bride. Please join together. La 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 chadudi ya la la ya la 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 likrakala ya la 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 bnei Shabbat bnei Shabbat nikave ya la 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 chadudi ya la 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 ya la 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 likrakala ya la 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 bnei Shabbat bnei Shabbat nikavela
Shamor v'zachor.
Shamor v'zachor b'diבור echad yishmi'anu el hamiuchad Adonai echad Shemo echad Shemo tiferet Beli b'chila la 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 ya la 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 el chadudi ya la 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 ya la 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 likratala ya la 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 bnei Shabbat bnei Shabbat nikavela.
Verse number 2.
Shabbat, alechu ben el echad, ki mekor habracha, merosh mi'edem mesucha, yisof ma'aseh b'machshava, tefila בחלל, גם בשמחה ובתורה, תוך אמונה עם סגולה, בואי חלל, בואי חלל.
Let's hear you.
Turn
Yeah,
back
yeah,
around. Ya la 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 חדותי, la 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 ya la 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 לקראת חלל, ya la 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 בני שבת נקרא, la 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 חדותי, ya la la ya la 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 לקראת חלל, ya la 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 בני שבת
We remain standing, page number 28.
We face east toward Yerushalayim. Lai, 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 lai. Ya, lai, 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 ya, la, lai. Ya, lai, lai, ya, lai, lai. Ya, lai, lai, ya, la, la, lai. Ya, la, lai, 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 ya, lai, lai, lai. Ya, la, lai.
We're seated together. We turn our attention now to the screen for creative rendition of this next prayer, which speaks about the wisdom in which God created the heavens, the earth, and the seasons, and especially time.
בחוכמה פותח בחוכמה פותח בחוכמה פותח שערים בחוכמה פותח בחוכמה פותח בחוכמה פותח שערים. Before the song over, oh that's not the first one. Before the breath of spring, no that's not it. I gotta do that again, I'm sorry. We're starting from the beginning. Before the wind, I am weak, there it is. Before the sun, I faint. I lose my strength, I lose my strength. בחוכמה, פותח בחוכמה, פותח בחוכמה, פותח שערים. בחוכמה, פותח בחוכמה, פותח בחוכמה. Vanquished by a star, I go to my knees. I am lost, I lose my strength.
Let's hear you. בחוכמה, בחוכמה, פותח בחוכמה, פותח בחוכמה, פותח שערים. בחוכמה, פותח בחוכמה, פותח בחוכמה. Before the song of a bird, before the breath of spring or fall, I am lost in nothing at all. בחוכמה, together. פותח בחוכמה,
פותח בחוכמה, פותח שערים. Once more, בחוכמה, פותח בחוכמה, פותח בחוכמה, פותח שערים. ברוך אתה אדוני המעריב המעריב הרביב.
Page 32.
בשוכבנו ובקומנו, נשיח בחוקיך, ונשמח בדברי תורתך, ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד. כי הם ראינו באורך ימינו, באורך ימינו, ובהם נגד יומם ולילה, יומם ולילה. ולילה ועבדך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל.
Page 34.
שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד.
Page 36.
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ושוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לתוצפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם מקום מצוותי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם אלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
Page 39. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go it is eternally Egypt, that there's a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands and marching together. Page 40. Bottom of page 43. Give us a place to rest, Adonai our God. Bring us into shelter in the soft, long evening shadows of your truth. For with you are true protection and safety, and in your presence are acceptance and gentle love. Watch over us as we go forth. Prepare for us as we return. Spread over us your shelter of peace, over all we love, over our Jerusalem and yours. Baruch atah Adonai, haporei sukat shalom aleinu, Be'al kol amo Yisrael, be'al Yerushalayim. Page 44 at the bottom, Yismechu.
Shomrei, shomrei, shomrei Shabbat b'koreh, onei Shabbat. Yismechu v'malchtecha. Shomrei, shomrei, shomrei Shabbat b'koreh, onei Shabbat. Mikashe shvi Shabbat. Kula yisbiru.
To our silent Amidah, either praying the traditional words on the page or whatever words are in our hearts, starting on page 46 and moving through page 64. As you pray, you can concentrate either on the prayers themselves or on any of the creative readings on the left side, which will frame those words for you, and you can be seated when you're finished. We rise together, page 46.
Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi agid tehilatecha. this room, in the YouTubeverse, in the Zoomiverse. For those who are ready, we lift our voices up, collectively praying for peace. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim
We're
Leolam.
on page number 60.
Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Ki ata hu melech adon lechol hashalom. Ki ata hu melech adon lechol hashalom. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amecha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amecha Tasim Leolam. Kitov beinecha litvarech et Amicha Yisrael. בכל עת ובכל שעה ישמרך. We breathe it in together. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amecha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amecha Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam.
We move now to think of those who are ill and who are in need of healing, who are in need of a refuah shlema, a complete healing of body, mind, soul, and spirit. We're to turn to page 253. And I'll invite us to turn our attention to the screen as our community casts names onto the screen of people for whom we are thinking. And I'll invite you to add your own as my eyes go around the room now. Again, page 253.
May the source of strength who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and bless.
It's customary each day between the second day of Passover until the holiday of Shavuot, which is in a few weeks, to count the days. And so I'm going to invite us to turn to page 278 as I count today's day, which is going to be the 21st day of the Omer. Hineni muchan u'mizuman l'kayem mitzvat aseh shel svirat ha'omer. I am ready to fulfill the mitzvah of counting the Omer. And I'll invite you to join with me in this blessing. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al svirat ha'omer. And so I count hayom echad v'esrim yom shehem shlosha shavuot la'omer. Today is the 21st day of the Omer, which is 3 weeks of the Omer. So we're going to move now, as we
Little
pull off of
inspiration
this screen, and you can see the inspiration on your right, that this theme of today is nobility and compassion, to move toward a really important conversation that we're going to engage in through an artistic medium. Now, we're going to get a chance to reflect on the events of this past week, and we can go off this slide now. The events of this past week and what the leaked documents in the Supreme Court means. Normally I would, of course, be droshing on that, but we actually have a special program on that which you can come to on Thursday night, and I'll speak more about that during the announcements. But this week was a really important week insofar as in the Jewish calendar and in the Israeli calendar, the kind of Holy of Holies, Yom Kippur for the secular Jew, Yom Kippur for the secular Israeli, was this past week. On Tuesday into Wednesday, we observed 2 holidays back to back. Yom HaZikaron, which was the remembrance for those who had died fighting in wars or in terrorist attacks. And in Israel, that saddest day of the year moves into the happiest day of the year, Yom HaAtzma'ut. Now, one of the goals for us this past year has been to engender conversation around Israel. And the truth is, talking about Israel isn't always easy. Many of us have our own opinions, and many of us, especially rabbis, feel like talking about Israel can become a third rail. So, in order to facilitate that, we learned about Gili Getz, who has an incredible one-person show that runs about 30 minutes, that he always follows up with a conversation. Now, the show is entitled The Forbidden Conversation, and he's going to talk about how difficult it is to actually talk about Israel. And so the way that we're going to frame this, and we've never actually, Gili and I talked, he's never done this quite like this before. Usually he has the performance, the 30 minutes, and goes right into a conversation. But we wanted everybody to see the performance, knowing that some of you didn't come specifically for the conversation and for the performance. So we're going to have the performance. We'll do the concluding 2 or 3 prayers that we normally would do after the sermon. Grab a little bit of nosh in the back for about 10 minutes. And anyone who wants to stay to debrief with Gili what he did and to talk about the difficulty of having conversations around Israel is invited to then debrief and to stay afterwards. And so with that, it's my pleasure to invite him up to the bima now.
It's been 69 months since my forbidden conversation. It's been 69 months since the forbidden conversation was something that only happened to others. It's been 69 months since the forbidden conversation snuck up on an honest, open, and insightful conversation and forbade it. It's been 69 months since the war in Gaza. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm intimately familiar with the forbidden conversation. Not a week goes by when someone doesn't mention to me that they've taken themselves out of the conversation. Not a week goes by when someone doesn't tell me a story about how they forbid themselves from the conversation. Not a week goes by when someone doesn't confess to me, I'm not having that conversation anymore. I'm not having that conversation with my father. I'm not having that conversation with my mother. I'm not having that conversation with my sister, my brother. I'm not having that conversation with my uncle, especially not my uncle. I'm not having that conversation with my family, my friends, my neighbors, my congregation in shul. I'm not having that conversation with my business partner, my client, my professor, my rabbi. I'm not having that conversation, not even with myself. And who can blame them? The conversation about Israel can be, usually is, so contentious, divisive, destructive, turbulent, tumultuous, confrontational, explosive, violent, emotional, painful, vitriolic, hyperbolic, self-righteous, loud, toxic, uncivil, rude, insulting, full of angry diatribes, or as some students eloquently refer to it, a bummer issue. It's not worth the anguish, the bitterness, the shame. Who are they trying to convince anyway? So they opt out. I read about the forbidden conversation in the New York Times. Quote, rabbis are anguishing over what to say about Israel. If they defend Israel, they risk alienating older members. If they say anything critical, they risk angering older generation. If they say anything supportive, critical, they risk angering the older generation. Even the quote, even presenting a centrist balance and talking about both sides is fraught with danger, end quote. Danger. I read about the forbidden conversation in the Jewish Daily Forward. Quote, we're so busy drawing lines on acceptable speech on Israel that our civic space for dialogue is shrinking to the size of a shekel coin, end quote, wrote the editor-in-chief. I listened to what the experts say about the forbidden conversation. Quote, young Jewish leaders tend to adopt a don't ask, don't program on Israel policy, said a renowned sociologist. But I never experienced it for myself. I love talking about Israel. A good debate about Israel politics is what I do for fun. I seek this conversation. If I meet anybody slightly interested in the conversation, or I think they are, I'll inevitably bring it up. I enjoy talking about Israel politics like most people enjoy talking about great hummus. I enjoy talking to people who express, who have no opinions, and I enjoy talking to people who have very strong opinions. I enjoy talking to people who know very little, and I enjoy talking to people who made this issue their career. I enjoy talking to people who recite talking points, and I enjoy talking to policy wonks. I enjoy talking to people in person, on Instagram, on the phone, on Facebook, on Twitter, and sometimes when I'm alone. From name calling to substantive policy debate, I'll usually take the bait. Okay, I admit it. I'm going to say it out loud. I am a political junkie. From budget negotiations to committee hearings to the glorious, almighty, always historic elections, we the junkies can never have enough. The Twitter feed is our pipe, and the news cycle is our crack, and we can never have enough political debate. But Israel, for me, is not just another issue to debate. Israel, for me, is not just another issue. It was 1973. And as soon as my parents found out that I was conceived, that my mother was pregnant, they immediately applied for a permit to go to Israel. They were living in Latvia, that was at the time occupied by the Soviet Union. Their names were Misha and Galina. They're an engineer and a doctor about to start a family. They knew very little about Jewish tradition, but their Jewish identity was firmly connected to a small country in the Middle East on the brink of war. Just to apply for a permit, you had to quit your job, come up with 20 times your annual salary as a penalty, and then wait, sometimes years. And if your application was denied, as many were, your character as a loyal citizen was compromised, and you could be forced to work as a street cleaner, no matter your education. But my parents really wanted to go to Israel. They wanted their child, me, to be born in Israel, even though it meant my father might never see his sister or parents ever again through the Iron Curtain. As they were waiting for the permit, the Yom Kippur War broke, and all permits were suspended. The dream of having me be born in Israel seemed very far away. But because of growing international pressure on the Soviet ban on Jewish immigration, and because the Latvian local authorities resented the Russians, and because my mother got very, very pregnant, they finally got all the permits they needed to get them on the plane that took them to Vienna, Austria, where they were put in a castle. The Austrians had extra castles to spare until the Israeli government had enough immigrants to fill up a plane and take them to the promised land. It was a time when Palestinian terrorists started hijacking planes and killing civilians to draw international attention to the Palestinian issue. My parents' group of immigrants were considered a target, so they were guarded by uniformed Austrian guards with dogs. And that really scared the elderly immigrants because it reminded them of the Nazis and the horror that they experienced, the horror my family experienced. And my dad tried to calm them down and tell them that this time, they were there to protect us. I was supposed to be born right there in Vienna, Austria, but I waited. And I only came out to the world a few short days after we arrived in Eretz Israel. And as far back as my memory goes, whenever my parents talk about me, they always mention with a hint of pride in their voice, and he is a Sabra, a term for a Jewish person born in Israel. Even my earliest memories of my father and grandfather's political arguments are pleasant memories. I grew up in a political home and always felt very comfortable, and still do, opening a passionate political debate with my relatives. Whether it's Aryeh, who lives in a settlement in the West Bank, or Yoel, who lives in the heart of the Tel Aviv bubble. Aryeh has attempted to hijack an airplane in Leningrad in the early 70s to draw international attention to the Soviet ban on Jewish immigration. He was caught and sentenced to 13 years in a Soviet prison. Aryeh believes the Israeli society has to be much more aggressive fighting terrorism to survive in the Middle East. Aryeh believes that Palestinians will never compromise and are always to blame. My cousin Yoel, who served in the elite intelligence unit in the army, believes the Israeli society has lost its collective mind, is absolutely morally bankrupt to what it's doing to the Palestinians, and is marching confidently towards becoming a fascist state. Neither of them have ever opted out of the conversation. We share our disagreements and argue our positions where we meet, and then we eat. Because we're family, and that's what families do. But most, I enjoy talking politics with my dad. The immigrant turned Israeli ambassador. He always made time to talk politics. He supported and encouraged me in whatever it is that I did, but it was extra special when I got engaged in my first campaign, my first primaries, my first political hero, my dad's political hero, Yitzhak Rabin. The first election, a new government, a new hope. My first political dream, that peace was possible. I was young and idealistic, and I thought that peace was just around the corner. There was hope and fear and pain. There was the Oslo peace process and exploding buses, the exaltation of history being made for peace, and the horror of suicide bombers, all at the same time. And at that time, I was a soldier. And it was my job as a chief photographer for the military police to document the carnage perpetrated by suicide bombers right after it happened. At the same time, I started to photograph the military's interaction with Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. It was at that time I realized the camera was there to help me get through very difficult times, make sense of these experiences. Hiding behind the camera, I was free from fear or emotion to just document what was in front of me. Click after click, unmoved, unaffected, protected by the glass of the lens. Then later, alone at the lab, I'd look at the images, connect to my emotional memory, and struggle to give it all meaning. Politics has become very real. The aftermath of a suicide bomber exploding in a number 5 bus in the center of Tel Aviv. Bodies all around me, click. Badly burned body of a child, click. Body parts mixed with metal, click. You never forget the smell. You never forget. And later at the lab, looking at the images, I could feel the anger, the rage bubbling inside of me. He was only 13. She looks like someone I know. This could have been me. What human being can do something like this? Revenge! Another checkpoint in the West Bank. Long lines of Palestinians, click. Israeli soldiers, click. The Palestinian father and son, click. You never forget the look in their eyes. You never forget. Then later, look at the images. I could feel the sadness, the shame. An 18-year-old soldier barking at a 50-year-old man while his little boy is learning the ways of movement restrictions, roadblocks, curfews, intimidation, humiliation, fear, and hate. And hate! And all the while, the political conversation around me gets louder and louder, more and more divisive, more and more insightful, more and more hateful, more and more murderous. The prime minister is a traitor, treason, betrayal, Nazi. I couldn't wait on the weekends where I could and go home and talk to my dad. He always knew how to put all these things in perspective. And then we went to the Glorious Peace Rally, and then there were 3 shots. And then they announced that Prime Minister Rabin was murdered. And then there was the funeral, and I photographed that funeral as my last assignment for the military. Thousands of Israelis line up the highway between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, shock on their face, tears in their eyes, click. The military vehicle carrying the coffin of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin making its way slowly to the Knesset, click. Thousands and thousands of Israelis pass by the flag-draped casket of my assassinated hero, click. President Clinton, the First Lady, come to say goodbye. Shalom Chaver, click. Click, click. I couldn't hide behind the camera this time. I couldn't block the sadness, the shame, the rage. I knew I lost something forever. Later at the lab, looking at the image, it made no sense. Even today, more than 20 years later, looking at this image, it makes no sense. A Jew killing a Jew. A political murder. That is how that conversation ended. After that, there's no more debate. After that, there's no more right or wrong after that. There is no more. And then there was Bibi, and then the second Intifada begins, and then President Clinton can make Barak and Arafat sing the sweet music of peace. And then 9/11, and then the roadmap to peace that no one was interested in following, and then the disengagement, and then there was the summer of 2014. And there was the kidnapping and murder of 3 teenager boys, and then there was the war. in Gaza. I spent the summer of 2014 the way I spend every summer in Israel. I spent the war in Israel. My parents live in a small and serene yeshuv, a quiet town in southern Israel. My dad and I developed this ritual during the war of having a conversation right after Channel 2 news and dinner, and after my stepmother made a mini speech using extreme foul language directed at Prime Minister Netanyahu. She isn't a fan. My dad and I kept talking about the difficult choices Israel is facing. It was a difficult day, that day. A very bloody day in the neighborhood of Sajahia. More than 80 people died that day. More Palestinian kids died that day. We heard and felt Hamas rockets exploding nearby and had multiple visits to our bomb shelter, obeying the screaming sirens. The international community was fumbling efforts to stop the war, and a sense of hopelessness and confusion was dominating the national conversation. We had a similar conversation many times before, but something felt different this time. Our voices reached louder volume than usual. What do you expect us to do? Nothing? My father said. Just have them fire rockets whenever they can't get their way? We're not doing nothing, I said. We're dropping tens of thousands of explosives in Gaza. Hundreds are dead, thousands are injured, many thousands are homeless. It's not nothing. We do what we have to do to protect ourselves. I don't like it any more than you do. Netanyahu is refusing to negotiate. And with political vacuum comes violence. It's very dangerous to run a country like that. We can't live like this. We can't live in a bomb shelter. No other country would accept it. And they can. 48 years of military occupation with no end in sight. Netanyahu actively sabotaging any chance of negotiation, any chance of hope. This is not the right time. My father argued. They're not ready. Are we ready? I wanted to know. 20 years of a peace process, and they're further away from a state than ever. Talking gets them nothing, only more settlements. We have all the leverage and we do nothing with it. This is our responsibility, I declared. They don't want us here. They'll always find an excuse to use violence. We try to make peace. They chose violence. Who's they? They have disagreements with the use of violence the way we do. You don't understand Arab mentality and you're naive. You're very condescending. You know how many generals talk about the dangers of an endless occupation? Children in Sderot are horrified. Children in Gaza are traumatized. Khaled Mash'al, the leader of Hamas, is not interested in peace or two states. The goal is an Islamic theocracy. They're extremists and they want the whole land. So is the Israeli right in the government. You can't compare. Why not? They use very similar rhetoric. I know, I take time to listen. Ideas like the other side understands only force. The other side interprets goodwill for weakness. The other side doesn't understand we have a religious ownership of the entire land. That both negate that the other side is a story, that the other side is a struggle, that the other side is human. You can't compare us to them. I could see my father was upset, but I didn't stop there. I had to say what I was about to say, but yes, maybe it was the hey, I'm not a kid anymore trigger. Maybe I was upset that the extremists are winning the day. Maybe I was scared after seeing thugs in the center of Tel Aviv using violence against anti-war demonstrators. But I stood up and said, yes, I can compare. And if we stop trying to reach peace and end the occupation, The entire Zionist movement will be tainted by apartheid. Judaism will be tainted. History will not forgive us. I would later realize that that was the moment where I entered the forbidden conversation. After that moment, the conversation was forbidden, always avoided with a quick change of topic and a polite deflection. I realized I crossed the line with my dad, but I didn't recognize or understand the line. I didn't say anything that was not said this way or another by former Israeli prime ministers, heads of Shabbat and Mossad, generals. So what was it? I found myself in a forbidden conversation without the ability to understand how I got there, and I was hurt. But I get it now. I feel it now. I hurt it now. Politics is how we bonded. Is that it? Can I no longer talk to the man who shaped my values, my views, my very identity about the most important topic? I came back to New York and I had to understand what has happened. I started looking for and talking to anyone who had problems talking to the parents about Israel. I can no longer talk to my father about Israel. Told me, a Hillel student, about to graduate and go to rabbinical school. And what did it do to your relationship? I asked, getting more anxious the more of these conversations I had. She paused for a second and then said, I don't think he really knows me anymore. After another short pause, she added, I don't think he even knows why is it that I'm going to rabbinical school. I became obsessed with this line of the conversation about Israel. What is this line? Boundaries, parameters. Where are they? How do we recognize them? Who sets them? Who defines them? Who's obligated to them? Covering this issue in the past, I knew about the rules of civility. A year of civil discourse. After more than 3,000 years, we Jews still don't have this arguing thing down, so we need some rules. But these rules didn't seem to address the fallout in the conversation about good manners, about the fallout in the conversation with my father. But I remember there's another set of rules, written rules, guidelines that were evoked before a controversial Jewish or Israeli speaker came to speak at the Jewish space and campus. When I looked into it, I learned that Jewish students from all across the country, from the best universities, who are opting into the conversation. They're all coming together to have their first inaugural conference in Harvard, where they're planning to engage in an open conversation about Israel with no rules at all. No lines, no boundaries, no parameters, no censorship. All Jews were welcomed. Oy vey. I immediately volunteered to cover and photograph it for an Israeli paper. Yeah, photograph it. I was sure I'd get some insight while photographing. They raised the money themselves, so no big donor could pull the plug. They invited professors and scholars, some of which are forbidden to speak in Jewish communal institutions. There were Zionist, anti-Zionist, non-Zionist, and post-Zionist. They evoked the dialectic nature of Judaism itself, the open debate ingrained in Jewish and Talmudic values. They were literally about to engage in a forbidden conversation. And they debated. Where do we go from here? Click. How do we have an open conversation? Click. How do we confront anti-Semitism? Click. How do big donors shape the agenda in the Jewish world? Click. Yes boycott, no boycott, beyond the green line boycott. Click. One state, two state, no state. Click. They didn't prevent Palestinians from speaking, as is sometimes the case in the pro-Israel camp. They didn't boycott or vilify Israeli Zionists, as is sometimes the case in the pro-Palestinian camp. But mostly it was a conversation among young Jews who seemed deeply committed to their Jewish identity. Some professors and scholars who didn't even participate in this conference came to watch the conversation. Even the executive director of Harvard, Hillel himself, came to watch the conversation. They talked about Zionism, the forbidden conversation about the role that it plays in Judaism, in American 2 days of a Jewish forbidden conversation. Hiding behind the camera, I was free to document hard conversations being had and difficult questions being asked. Later, looking through the images, I realized that for me, those questioning the legitimacy of the entire Zionist movement sound very similar to those questioning the existence of the occupation. They're both denying a struggle for freedom and security of a people. Struggles that are for me are now intertwined. Struggles that are for me are now inseparable. And it was right there looking at the images that I realized that my dad got hurt, because I started to question the Zionist dream and the Zionist vision. And even though I didn't mean to do it, I questioned my dad's life story. I questioned my own. But I also realized there's another debate. There's another conversation. There's another debate. And that debate is happening inside of me, not just in conversations with others. And that debate is tearing apart my identity as a Jewish, Israeli, American, liberal Zionist. And I'm going to have to learn to live with that tension. And suddenly things became crystal clear. I don't want to live in a community where being pro-Israel inherently means being anti-Palestinian. I also don't want to live in a community where supporting Palestinian violent struggle for freedom is inherently anti-Israeli. I don't want to be reduced to pro or anti. I don't want to buy into the zero sum. I don't want to lose my father. It's been 69 months since my forbidden conversation. It's been 69 months since the war in Gaza. Thank you.
Performances like that shouldn't go undiscussed, and so we'll get a chance to discuss the themes that came from Gilly's forbidden conversation and the beautiful performance that he put on, so thank you so much. We're going to move now into the concluding section of our service. I'll invite us to rise together as we move toward Aleinu, page 282. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. Page 287. ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו echad. Please be seated. We move now into the concluding prayer of our service as we think of those that we've loved and who we've lost, those who are in our hearts and minds this Shabbat. As I call the name of your loved one, I'll invite you to rise and remain standing through the recitation of names. This Shabbat we recall the following individuals: Jerome Applebaum, Greg Brudnicki, Gedalia Convisar, Meyer Ezrin, Serene Funk, Jean Goldstein. Irma Gross, Jill Hershkovitz, Jacob Hertzberg, Jacob Hirsch, Rebecca Kahn. Oscar Kettler, Esther Kleinman, Anna Krulowitz, Sylvia Lang, Fanny Latz, Nathan Lavenda. Ray Levy, Julius Maltonfort, Albert Mandelkern, Libby Mankis, Samuel Miller. Jeffrey Newman, Sidney Noodleman, Bennett Owens, Regina Peters, Freddie Pressman, Zelig Rappaport, Gerald Udell, Darrell Worth, and Samuel Zeman. And those who are in their Shiva and Shloshim periods of mourning: Eleanor Achfeld, aunt of Rachel Fedderson; Robert Krentzman, husband of Barbara Krentzman; Marianne Kramer, mother of Chris Kramer; and Lynn Adler, stepmother of Deb Alper. And we sent an email about this, I think yesterday, but we recite the name Joseph Ruffalo, brother of Jane Degenshine, and there'll be visitation where Jane will be at, and you can offer her comfort tomorrow from 12 to 5, and you can look for your email for the address of that. In addition, I'll invite anyone who's gathered here who may be observing a yard site not on this list or is within their 1-year period of mourning to please rise and share the name of the person for whom they're thinking, whether family or friend. We turn to page 294 and we rise together. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah. B'yama divrach yirutei b'yamlich malchutei. B'chayachon uv'yomachon uv'chayit b'chol Beit Yisrael. Ba'agala uv'izman karib v'imru amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam u'lamei almaya. Yiparach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei d'kudashah b'richu. Le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbachata v'nechamata. Damiram b'yama v'imru amen. Yehi shalama Rabbah min Shemaya. V'chaim aleinu ve'orko Israel v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav. Hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu ve'orko Israel v'imru amen. Please be seated. So before we move into our closing song, just a few brief announcements. So tomorrow morning, services begin at 10 a.m. as we welcome Nate for the very first time as bar mitzvah to the bima. We want to wish him a mazel tov. We also want to wish Gabe and his family a mazel tov. Gabe will become bar mitzvah at a later service in the afternoon. By the way, now that we're just wishing mazel tovs, I see that Kyle and Jackson Parma are in the back. They turned 13 yesterday, which actually kind of was their official bar mitzvah the day they turned 13. And we'll be celebrating them, I think, in like 2 short weeks. So mazel tov to them as well. Tomorrow morning, in addition, before that, we've got Torah study at 8 a.m. and spiritual practice. 8:30 a.m. Spiritual practice with the cantor at 9 a.m. Chanting circle. Yep. We have a number of other really important and wonderful things happening throughout the course of the next few weeks. I'm going to plug 3 things, though there's probably a lot more in addition to what I'm going to plug. On Thursday night, and I alluded to this when I began talking, events like this week's events need to be talked about, especially with Roe v. Wade in such danger and such peril. So normally I would have talked about it tonight, but we had this amazing opportunity to hear from Gilly, but it's perfect because we have the Attorney General of the state of New Jersey coming to the congregation on Thursday night. And so we called him up and we said, you know what, rather than talk about just the things that we were going to have you talk about before, can you address, if Roe v. Wade does fall, what is in place and what could be in place in New Jersey to protect at least here a woman's right to choose? And so that's what he's going to concentrate on, and he's going to be in conversation with our VP of Tikkun Olam, Amy Winkleman, who's going to be interviewing him and talking to him about the issue, and then they'll turn their attention to other things, whether it's poverty, whether it's civil rights, whether it's environmental justice, and that'll be here Thursday night at 7:30. In addition, we've got our big spring fundraiser coming up. It begins with a 5K run walk, and then moves from there into a brunch. And we're going to be honoring two amazing staff members at our congregation, Lori Schifano and Maribel Leon, both of whom have been here for roughly 20 years. And so in honor of their collective 40-ish years together, we are going to be celebrating them. And so please sign up for the brunch, take out an ad, make sure that you've got new running shoes and you can join us for that road race. We would love to see you there. Finally, Shavuot is coming up. That's going to be on the 4th of June. And it happens that we have our scholar of Shavuot, who happens to be married to Gilly here, and Yael, who is here, has done one of the most transformative and amazing things in, I would say, modern Hebrew kind of history, which is that she went and retranslated the whole Torah and flipped the Torah's genders. Anything that was masculine is feminine, anything that is feminine is masculine. And when we were talking and potentially having her come, she did a quick 10 minutes to show me what it was like. And when you flip the genders of the Torah and of the prayers, you see it with completely different eyes. And so she's our scholar in residence for that particular night. And we always join together. It's actually here. We move around location to location each year with the 3 other congregations in the area. And so please join us. That's on the 4th. And it's going to be a late night of learning together, but starting at 7:30 that night. Kendra, anything else that we should add? Probably not necessarily.
There always is, but just read your e-garret. I know that this melody that we're about to end our tefillah with is known by Yael and Gilly, because when I was singing it earlier in the service, she was singing along. This is why by one of this particular setting of Oseh Shalom that we're going to finish with tonight is set by one of the most popular bands in Israel doing liturgical music, and so much of it is come here to the States through friends and family singing along, and so here we go. Nava Tehillah is the name of the band. Look them up if you haven't already. And they also lead tefillah, and you can see them in Israel. Oseh Shalom bimroma, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, ve'imru, amen. Let's try that again. Here we go. Oseh shalom bimroma, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, ve'imru, amen. Now we sing alai, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 again, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la. Once more, Oseh shalom bimroma, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, ve'imeru, amen.
So make a point, introduce yourself to someone you don't know. There's a lot of people here who you probably don't. Go into the back, grab a nosh, and in about 10 or so minutes, for those who want to stay, come back up to the front, and Gili's going to host a debrief and a conversation about how you talk about Israel, about your forbidden conversation. So Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Are we ending the live stream here?
We are indeed.